Welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and I'm joined tonight by Nick Ortiz, and we're going to talk about the Party for Socialism and Liberation. But I want to sort of preface that by saying we're going to have more than one show about minor parties in Connecticut that have a presence here. And of course, the show is part of it every week, but it's becoming really clear that the bipartisan system we're in is not really serving most of the people. Although there are little details that are differences between the Democrats and the Republicans, they are ultimately not serving the working class, not serving the vulnerable people in our society, and it's becoming clearer. So I am going to try to have a few shows introducing people to different parties that are active in Southeast Connecticut, because, I mean, it's sort of trite to say the more the merrier, but really we do need more views, more dialogue, different perspectives, even if, for people who don't choose to leave one of the major parties. So welcome, Nick.
Thank you for having me.
And well, it should be fun. So talking like 10 minutes ago before the show, it turned out that we were both former Democrats, and we left the Democratic Party within a certain period of time that was quite similar, around 20 years ago. Yeah. And do you want to talk a little bit about your stay as a Democrat and, and your journey since then?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm from Texas. I'm just moved to Connecticut maybe a year and a half ago, and in Texas, the Democrats are a minority party. They hold very, very, very little power there, and as we're seeing, even currently within this last week, they're having issues with Greg Abbott wanting to gerrymander it more and give Texas more seats, right? Well, I had started initially. I think it was basic human empathy that made me a Democrat. It's looking at the reality of things, and that growing up Chicano, especially in Texas, you hear you're an illegal, you're made fun of because you're brown, you're made fun of because of all of these different things. And for me, that really stuck out to me growing up, because it was the Republicans who are always demonizing Mexicans. And again, I'm Chicano. I'm very proud of my heritage, and I couldn't, rock with a party that viewed me as an enemy, because my firm belief is that, the border crossed us. So, growing up,
it isn't just your belief. I think the maps show that that's the reality.
Yes, that is a firm. I don't know if we can look at those maps here, but absolutely. And that really informed my worldview, is just like looking at people who look exactly like me being demonized, when we know that not only are they hard workers, but they bring a lot of value culturally. Mexicans bring a lot of value culturally. And I mean, American culture flourishes because of Chicanos, because of Mexicans. And when I got out of high school, I was the president of the Democratic Party at my local community college. I was very rah-rah, blue dog. And I think what made me flip was in 2016, seeing the Bernie Sanders, clearly very popular. He had a beautiful worldview, that I could align myself with. He's asking for Medicare for all. And, my family deals with a lot of health issues, and I mean, recently my dad lost his job because he went on leave and they're like, your leave's too long, we got to fire you. It was very, really, really crazy. So that's what initially had made me disconnect from the party, is like realizing how undemocratic they actually are. Initially, just in 2016. And then, of course, 2020 rolls around. Even then, I was still iffy. I wasn't exactly off of the Democratic chain, because I did end up voting for Joe Biden in 2020 because we're going through the pandemic. Workers are dying, at the workplace. These essential workers aren't actually, being treated as if they were essential. So I was like, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, make him the most popular one-term president, right? Well, as Joe Biden enters office, things start compiling. One, we have the genocide happening in Israel, historic Palestine. We have the railroad workers threatening to go on strike, and this really, this Democratic president who says he's the most pro-union president, makes it to where it's illegal for these railroad workers to go on strike. And then seeing the 2024 election, this, really old Democrat who is clearly having issues, talking to folks, getting policies out, he goes onto the debate stage and completely flubs it, with Donald Trump. And then, of course, they make the shift to Kamala Harris. Again, another very undemocratic thing, just giving the nomination to Kamala Harris.
Especially when people saw that coming. It isn't that he was in perfect health and suddenly had a health crisis.
That's right. Yeah.
So there was talk from the months before that transfer happened.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then just seeing how, at that point in time, I was already so more of my background is I am a Brown Beret as well, which is a Chicano nationalist organization who fight for the self-determination of, Mexicanos. And so I'd already been doing community work, and in Austin I was doing this community work. And that's where I started rubbing shoulders with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And that's where we started, doing more community events together, doing community cleanups, doing community actions. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, we were in the streets with the PSL. And I had already kind of seen myself as a radical. I identified as a democratic socialist at that point in time. And of course, as I started learning more about what socialism actually is, what Marxism is, what Marxism-Leninism is, it really turned my eyes to, the actual root problems. And it's not that it's one central figure that is the problem, because Donald Trump is merely a symptom of the capitalist system. And so in my view, and as well as the party's view, it is actually the capitalist system that is the issue. And that if we do these reforms, that's all good and well, but we can't overturn the system and create equality and liberation for folks if we don't, take the system at its root.
And so, I was a Democrat for 30 years, and, 2000 was actually when I started wondering what's really happening between the two parties, because that presidential election, it was quite clear to me that there were so many irregularities in Florida. And the primary one, they talked about the hanging chads, and they talked about the butterfly ballot, but really the biggest scam, I guess, in that Florida election was the disenfranchisement of tens of thousands of black voters.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and the Democrats didn't fight it. And that seemed to me to be kind of, almost an existential point in our democracy. Not that it was perfect before, but at that point it seemed like, we just lost it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, it was similar for me, the final nail in the coffin was when I heard about the Democrats suing the PSL in Georgia to get them off the ballot. They did that in Georgia, they did that in Pennsylvania. And so this party that calls themselves the Democratic Party just regularly does stuff that is undemocratic.
Yeah, and of course they've done the same with the Greens in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and they have the big money to be able to do it. So
Absolutely they do.
So I did remain a Democrat until 2004 because I like voting in the primary elections.
Okay.
At all levels. And in 2004, there were 3 different primary elections for the president, for Congress, and for New London state rep in the 39th district. And in all 3, my favorite candidate lost. And I thought, I'm not going to ever be able to make change from within because I'm just not close enough to where they are. And that's about where I left. So it's been 20 years now.
Yeah. No, and I also thought that like there could be change that could be done from within. But like the reality is a lot of these all of these establishment Democrats have people they have to answer to, the donor class. So no matter how good-willed we are, can things actually change? And this is my skepticism with folks like Zoran Mandani. Like, I'm excited for Zoran Mandani. It's
Sure.
a really big victory. But he's also going against the capitalist system. He's going against capitalist interests. And how far, and it's a capitalist legislator, so how far can, these promises go? It would be fantastic to have state-run grocery stores. Coming from Texas, there's a lot of rural areas with no hospitals that are basically food deserts. So this would be a fantastic example. But, he's, again, also butting up against capitalist interests,
And, so my other experience from longer ago was that, we were kibbutz members in a small kibbutz called Adamit in northern Israel, right near the Lebanese border. It didn't feel like Israel, so it felt more like Palestine, actually. All our neighbors were Bedouin villagers. And it was a socialist community. The children slept in their own children's houses from age like 2 months. It was parents' choice whether they wanted to have their babies go straight into the baby house or whether they wanted to keep them in the apartment for the first couple months. Okay. And I guess because there were so many young families there, most chose the latter. Most chose the former. They put their children in the children's house from day one. But we had pretty good socialism within the kibbutz. Everyone who was there, whether a member or a volunteer, they all had a roof over their head. Everyone ate meals in the dining room.
Yeah.
You got your work clothes for free. You got an allowance for like other clothes. What else? You were told, you had a job to do every day. You got some spending money. You had health care.
Wow.
But this community and all the other kibbutzim were operating within a capitalist, country.
Yeah.
And it was a funny situation that, we had chicken farm and orchards, peach, apple, and then down the hill we had oranges and bananas and avocados. And we sold everything through a cooperative. There was many different kibbutzim, but then, they got shipped to Europe or, all around the world, and there were choices to grow the varieties that were early because they got the best price on the international market. Yeah. So we had 70 people in this little community, and there are some much bigger ones that have 1,000 people, but all of them are little, just little bigger than households, but they have to operate within a whole country that is, well, of course, it's increasingly gotten to be really like off the deep end.
Yeah.
At the time, early 70s, it had a little bit different feel about it. But part of the issue with socialism, and I think part of the challenge, is how to make change on a big enough scale that you're not just creating isolated little pockets.
No, for sure, and that is our task, as the Party for Socialism and Liberation, is to popularize socialism, because the reality is capitalism has been around for a very short amount of time, and before capitalism, what human history is like 300,000. In like the 290,000 years, we live communally. We met each other's needs. And that's what you were describing. You're describing living with dignity, living within community, and making sure that folks within your community are not starving, are not houseless. And the reality is, in America, we live in a post-scarcity society. We have issues where we have too many houses, where we throw metric tons of food away, because they're blemished, because this banana's bruised. And the reality is we can use these systems in place like Amazon, like Tesla, to deliver these goods, these needs to folks in need. But the reason why we don't is because it goes against the capitalist interests. And we believe that if workers were to, seize, the means of production, if workers were to, have control of where, these funds and these different we believe that if workers have the ability to choose where that money goes, that we can bring everyone a dignified life.
Now, as you were talking, I was thinking about the movie The Take. Have you seen that?
I've not.
I don't remember if it took place in Argentina, but one of the South American countries, there was an abandoned factory. The owners just left and the workers took it over. So it was a pretty great movie. And at least at the time the movie was made, they had prevailed against the challenges.
That's awesome.
I'd recommend looking it up.
I definitely will.
So maybe we should talk about what it would be if we instituted socialism here. What would it look like? Because socialism is a scary term for a lot of people. It's been demonized for a few generations, several generations. And what we have kind of grew more out of a feudalistic model, kind of applied to the Industrial Revolution somehow.
Yeah.
But what would it look like to have socialism instituted in this country?
Yeah, so I mean, as I'd mentioned, it is giving dignity to everyone, not just a very few, not a minority people. It would also mean, workers have control of where that money goes, where money is allocated. And it also would mean, Medicare for all. It would mean providing housing for everyone. Growing up in Texas, there is a humongous affordability issue. And the reason why that is because we have, companies like Blackstone, BlackRock, Geo Group, these humongous corporations going into Austin. And it's an issue here in the Groton, here in Mystic, in these seaside towns where these companies go, they buy these houses, they price people out of them, and they use it purely as speculation, purely as investment. And so we would take that out of it. There would be no Geo Group, there would be no Blackstone controlling these very necessary, goods.
And it goes beyond housing. I think what we have now, it seems as though everything is being commodified.
100%. Every aspect of our life is being, our attention is being commodified, through advertisements, through, if you and I were talking about a phone charger offhandedly and my phone picks that up, I'm going to get ads for the next 5 days about phone chargers. You know, so everything in our life has been commodified. So it's taking that away. It's taking that power away because the reason why, that is because they can make money from us in every aspect of our life. We're not getting a dime from them mining our data. That's very important, sensitive data, and they want to say the boogeyman is China stealing that data from us. Mark Zuckerberg is doing that. Elon Musk is doing that. Peter Thiel is doing that.
Well, what was the new thing that we were seeing, that Delta Airlines is having individualized fares based on what they know about us?
Yes, searching your email. If your grandmother died and you had to go to California and they see that in your email, they will boost up the rates, because what are you going to do? Not go to your grandmother's funeral? And that right there is evil at another level. But the thing is people say that's free market. That's the enterprise. That's the world we live in, and that is a world that has been created. That is generations being manipulated into thinking that one day you can be that millionaire exploiting your grandmother's death. But to answer your initial question about socialism, all right?
Yeah.
So I think nowadays a lot of younger people, I'd say starting millennial up, because I'm a millennial. We haven't been inundated with Cold War propaganda. All we know is the ails of capitalism. And the thing is I knew about, the woes of capitalism before I knew what capitalism was. To me, it was my dad working 2 jobs and coming home at 10:30 at night, missing dinner, and not being able to spend time with him, or on the weekends going to work another odd job to pay for bills. That's what capitalism was to me. And my dad is a really hard worker, and he injured himself on the job, and because of that he was fired. And the reason why they want to do that is because healthcare costs will go up if he goes to the hospital, or if he claims something. But that's the thing, is people understand that, and they see that, and they think that I just need to get richer and I'll be able to help my dad. When the reality is your neighbor's going through that. You're going through that. You could go through that. We all know the woes of capitalism before we know what capitalism is, just inherently. And I think people recognize, and I think Bernie Sanders, to give him some credit, did a really big hand in popularizing what socialism is, or democratic socialism. But of course, that opened the eyes to a lot of other people on what socialism is. And I mean, that's how I started my journey, as I was just saying, becoming a democratic socialist, now being, a Marxist-Leninist, revolutionary Marxist-Leninist. I think that the tide is flipping. I think that people aren't as scared of socialism or as communism as they used to be.
Well, I'm sometimes at odds with my boomer generation, but I'm, kind of right in a little on the older side of it, but really smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
And I've given quite a lot of thought over the years as to how my generation ended up the way it did. Because, some of the things that happened in the 60s, early 70s were pretty promising. There was a lot of activity, a lot of actions against offensive wars, a lot of work on the civil rights front.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine how repressed life was in the 50s and even early 60s.
Yeah.
And that was kind of all we knew as young kids. It seems like we're going back to that, but that's a different subject, perhaps.
For sure.
But I think we reacted against the repressiveness, and that didn't go that badly. If you think about in the 60s, people of different races couldn't get married.
Yeah.
It's like, when I got married, the fact that, it was a Jew and a non-Jew getting married, we lived in Chicago and there was only one rabbi. My parents wanted us to get married by a rabbi. There was only one rabbi in the greater Chicago area who would perform mixed marriages.
Wow.
Maybe there were 2.
Okay.
But yeah, we had a family friend who was a rabbi, and he wouldn't do it, but he gave us the names of the 1 or 2 people who could.
Yeah.
And so I think progress has been made, although now we're backsliding a little on that.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we also grew up during the Cold War, and I think none of us really felt confident that the world would still be around in 50 years. And we didn't do very much long-term planning for the world to be in better place for the future generations.
And I honestly, I mean, that is by design. When you look at all of, the files that have been released by CIA, FBI, like that is by design. They wanted to create generations who not only feared communism, but, outrightly rejected communism, just solely based off of the word communism. And oftentimes, Donald Trump will call Kamala Harris or Joe Biden Marxists or, socialists or communists, when they are the exact opposite of that. They are in the pockets of corporate donors. We've seen that, just by their actions. Kamala Harris in 2020 campaigned on Medicare for all. This last cycle, that was nowhere near what she had advocated for. And to go back to your point, like what was happening, the civil rights revolution that happened in the 60s, the issue is these were all reforms. That's the issue. And we see even now with how Roe v. Wade was overturned. The Democrats could have codified that. There are so many steps that the Democrats could have taken between the 60s to now to codify a lot of these issues,
Right.
And they simply did it. They didn't. They had no. I think it would be disingenuous to say they had no interest, but it wasn't at the top of their priority list. And because these reforms can be overturned, no real progress can be made unless there is a revolution, unless we upturn the system on its head completely and we, fight for socialism.
Now, I think we started and didn't get all the way through what it would look like if the revolution happened.
Yeah.
What our country's government would look like, what day-to-day life would look like. I don't know if we adopted socialism by whatever means.
Yeah. So I would be remiss to describe exactly what this would look like, because it would require the participation of every person in our community. It would require to understand the needs. Things would have to be on a consensual basis, like talking about, the indigenous communities here, talking to the Mexican communities here, talking to, the Black community, providing reparations. There are so many things that go along with that I think I would be doing a disservice because it would be putting it in the hands of the workers. And the workers will be the ones to decide that. I mean, we're all working class people here, so we will be a part of that conversation. But for sure, it is ending patriarchy, because patriarchy, racism, nationalism, xenophobia, all of these, different bigoted views uphold capitalism. So once we, take capitalism out at the root, then it's our job as workers to work towards, actual equality. And this isn't a thing that would happen overnight. This isn't something that could even happen in 10 years. Again, it is something that would require the participation of every person. And if we just look at our elections, not every person is voting, but that may be by design. Apathy is something that is incentivized in the capitalist system.
Yeah, and more it does feel as though votes, maybe there is some way that voting can fit into the whole program, but it doesn't by itself change much. Although when you were talking about everyone being involved, I was thinking about one other way the kibbutz experience kind of was similar, is that every Saturday night, and this was in every kibbutz that I ever visited, as well as where we live, there was a general meeting. And things were voted on by all the members.
Yeah.
Not everyone who lived there was a member. There was a process that took about at least at least 6 months,
Okay.
usually 6 months to a year, to get voted in, because once you voted someone in, it was really hard to get rid of them. So
Yeah.
people sometimes prefer to err on the side of caution.
And to touch on that, the PSL actually has a book called Socialist Reconstruction, which is something that, we dive into what a socialist America could look like. Again, we have these really extravagant systems that could work in our benefit, not just in the benefit of Jeff Bezos. So I definitely recommend this to you and anyone watching. Socialist Reconstruction, it's a phenomenal book, and I highly recommend it.
That is, and there are models, around the world, like Mondragon in Spain is a huge worker-owned cooperative, and it's been around for quite a while, decades. And so it isn't all reinventing the wheel, but I think it feels like that for most Americans.
Well, what's the old saying? Like, people can imagine the end of the world before the end of capitalism. And like that is also by design. Like we can envision it because, especially nowadays, a lot of shows are just dystopian, futures of America and how it's crumbled. But the reality is like we are working our way towards that, because capitalism, not only does it hurt the people that are involved, the workers, but it actively hurts our environment. We are in a climate crisis, and this is something capitalism is unable to fix because it created it. And they try to come at us with, hey, it's individual responsibility. I mean, Taco Bell did a thing like 2 years ago where they said, bring in all of your old packets, your sauce packets, and we'll recycle them. And it's like, how is that our responsibility? Why don't you just put the sauce on our taco? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, these are like little things, but like the capitalist class will always push it back onto the individual when they have the full responsibility of creating these products,
Yeah. Well, and when I looked at the website, the PSL website, I was struck by, under socialism, there were some things that were strictly socialism that really corresponded a lot, very closely to my kibbutz experience.
Yeah.
But there were some things like sustainable agriculture. Most kibbutzim were, the agriculture was not very sustainable. I mean, drip irrigation was invented there, so they were conscious of water limitations, but it was chemical farming. It wasn't really, so that's actually a value that can be added to socialism, but it isn't necessarily a given. But, if you're thinking about things, you want to sustain the earth for
100%.
Your kids or grandkids or whatever.
Yeah, and I think one thing we all know to be true is that climate change is something that will affect everyone regardless of your class. Jeff Bezos is going to need clean air. Jeff Bezos is going to need clean water. He is not worried about that because he has his own little mansion somewhere with clean air, clean water filters. Well, us other folks, us working class people, have to actually worry about this. So I think being sustainable is a really important part. There are drastic changes that need to be made. Like, absolutely drastic changes that need to be made immediately. And does that mean we got to cut back on our little sweet treats? Absolutely it does. But we got to think about our future. We got to think about our kids. When I have kids, I don't want my kids to worry about where they can get clean water. And unfortunately, that's the reality for a lot of people in the global South. That hasn't come back to hurt us yet, but it is going to hurt us. And the only way to fix that is through taking these unsustainable practices and completely nicking them.
And you mentioned the free market, which is kind of sacrosanct if you're talking in the U.S. But my career was early childhood teacher. So I was a preschool teacher for, 30 years. And one thing, and mostly toddlers who are all into power and control. So one thing you have to be really clear about is the difference between freedom and license.
Okay.
So I think when we talk about free market, what we have in the US, it isn't really freedom, it's license.
Okay.
Freedom is freedom that individuals have that does not take away other people's freedom. Mm-hmm. But license is when you keep it all for yourself, so you're depriving others.
And and the thing is like I think there is this illusion that we are free, that we have freedom, but it's more of an abstract thing because we have the freedom of choice to choose what type of genes we have, but we don't have the freedom of choice to decide where we work. And people may say, well, if you don't like your job, quit it. So my choices are, work at a job that offers me not very good benefits, that doesn't provide me with a future, that pays me low wages, or starve. Like, that's the freedom that we have in America. And that's a freedom that, we seek to overturn, because again, we want to make sure people live with dignity. There's no reason why, here in Groton, we have Navy veterans who are homeless. There's no reason. That is a complete choice. And to say that, oh, well, that person may have done, things in his life that caused him or her to become homeless, that doesn't mean they don't deserve dignity. And that's it right there. It's, wanting to make sure people live dignified lives and have dignified deaths.
And honestly, we know that not just where we're talking about in Texas, but here too, there are more empty housing units than there are people who need the residential residences. So they're just within our current system, there's no way to make a match if the residential units that are available require you to put like over $20,000 a year into where you live.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at New London. What's happening with their school system. Flat rate. Humongous like cuts to the school board. Was it 56 employees were fired from the New London school system?
Yeah, or positions were. Ended.
Yeah, but not only that, you look at Bridgeport. Bridgeport's going through a very similar thing. Like I have comrades who were, let go of their jobs, and we say that children are our future, but we make no actual investment in their education.
Right, and from an economic point of view, investing in education is a better investment than giving tax credits to developers. There's an economist, Art Rolnick, who worked for the Minneapolis Fed for many years, and he was an expert in return on economic development investment. He's not a socialist by any means, but he looks at return on investment and education, especially early education, especially for people who are at the bottom of our chain here, gives a much higher return on investment than conventional investments that mostly don't actually develop anything. They might move a company from one town to another and start bidding wars, whereas educating people from a young age actually develops humans.
Yes.
And it makes a difference.
Yeah, and I mean, we can look at Texas as an example of what's to come. Like in Texas, they passed a bill about school vouchers. So this is siphoning public funds from public schools into private schools.
Right.
And that's under a Republican. And then we look at what's happening under a Democrat, Governor Lamont. Similar things are happening. So it's not, let's play teams, the Democrats are better. It's both of these capitalist parties do not have our interests in mind, and they're willing to throw our kids, under the bus, so to speak, for whatever, funds they may be getting.
So I think now, because time is moving, we should talk about the liberation part of it, because I'm kind of fascinated by including liberation within the party name. So what is I hate to use the word agenda, but what is the means and what are the issues related to liberation that PSL is concerned about?
Yeah, so I mean, the agenda is popularizing socialism and creating a socialist, America. That's the agenda. But the liberation aspect, I mean, I think it's a two-part question. Is not only liberation in America, breaking the chains that capitalism has put on all workers, whether, again, just going back to making sure people live dignified lives, but it's also, talking to, the black nations in America, the indigenous nations in America, doing land back, and we believe that all of that will help, with the climate crisis, will help with income inequality, providing reparations. So that's like the liberation aspect of things, is making everything on a consensual level. Like if you want to be a part of the project that is America, we want it to be on a voluntary basis. But it also means standing side by side with people who are struggling, like Palestinians, like Mexicans, like people in Venezuela, people in Cuba. It's standing side by side with them and fighting not only for our liberation, but of course, like liberation globally. And
that actually is something that the United States has been worse on than internally.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you look at our foreign policies, they do not, and we have bases all over the world.
Yeah.
Just as we were driving here, Bob and I were talking about how the United States imposes its, imperial designs on the rest of the world. And
yeah.
It's kind of not really very smart. It's sort of a bullying way of doing things. And China, although I'm not really in favor of any kind of imperial designs, is much smarter and does, makes things a fairer exchange, it seems like, than the U.S. So we're not even doing a good job of spreading our influence.
No, and that's the thing, is like, I wouldn't even consider China imperialist. The thing is like when they offer aid, they offer money, they are not saying bend to our will. Whereas America does that consistently. We look at Chile with, Allende, we look at, into the Pinochet regime.
Oh, yeah.
We look at Batista. We look at all of these dictators, and America holds itself as this, country that, wants to liberate people and bring democracy everywhere. But time and time again, they have supported dictators. And the reason why we have the, folks coming to our southern border is because of America's foreign policy. We plant those seeds in Venezuela. We plant those seeds in Guatemala, in El Salvador. And then that's the crop, coming home, is people who are like looking for better opportunity, because America has choked that opportunity out of those countries.
Oh, yeah. And in fact, it's worldwide, and the bases are worldwide, but in this hemisphere, it seems to have a really long history. The Panama Canal was supposed to be in Nicaragua, and in the late 1800s, Nicaragua was not adequately on board with what the U.S. was doing, and they seized land from Colombia to create Panama and have control.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this so many times. There's so many examples. You could point to from almost any continent on this map and find an example of America interfering with people's decisions, people's democratic decisions. And I think that's like the biggest issue, is like oftentimes people say Russia, they've interfered with the elections, but America has done that time and time again. And again, of course, they do it under the guise of democracy, of spreading freedom. But again, to repeat myself, time and time again, we've seen that oftentimes it's worse for those people who have been forced under America's like forced regime changes.
So a little bit of a fundamental look at how wealth is created. So wealth is kind of the combination of natural resources plus the labor to create things. And it seems as though the U.S. and many other capitalist countries are exploiting that, you know, taking the natural resources and not really adequately paying the workers, and the wealth is ending up here in a few hands.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've seen China take full advantage of American capitalist greed, the ruling class's greed. You know, when they had opened their industries to have American companies come in, what they did differently from the Soviet Union is they said, you're going to share your technology with us. And now we've seen that China has bolstered their economy. They have done right by their people, and they're growing faster than ever. I mean, then you look at BRICS. So back in the 90s, we had a polar world, and then after the fall of the Soviet Union, it became unipolar. And America was the center of global capitalism like it is now. And we see BRICS actively challenging that. And we see China using the technology that the American capitalists willfully gave to them to exploit the labor of Chinese people. And now, again, we're seeing how China is using that technology to not only grow their own economy, but grow faster and provide their citizens with a lot more than Americans.
And I think BRICS is something that most Americans don't really see coming. We're so accustomed to being the economic center of the world, and it looks to me like it's going to flip.
I mean, Donald Trump is so afraid of the U.S. dollar tanking. He's mentioned it so many times, and again, this is all because of the ruling class. They have designed it this way, and now these are the issues that are coming up.
So we probably have about 5 or 10 minutes left. So maybe we can talk about what PSL's presence in Connecticut is like.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how people can get in touch, and what's coming up that people can get involved in. Yeah,
so here in Connecticut, we are really involved in the Palestinian movement, the Palestine Solidarity Coalition. We are proud members of that coalition. Just this past week, we had Palestine Fling, which is a phenomenal cultural event. It was just a really great time. We actually held it at the Palestine Museum, which is apparently the only Palestine museum in the United States. So
the one in Woodbridge.
Yes, yeah, beautiful place. And so we're really involved with that. Of course, we have a campaign called Seize the Grid. In Connecticut, I'm sure everyone watching, everyone in the studio has felt the EverSource, those rate hikes continuously going up, and then the regulatory body, PURA, that is supposed to stop it or question it, or whatever these hikes, they constantly rubber stamp. So our move is to do what like Groton,
Groton, I think
Norwich, make it a public utility. So that's something that we're working towards right now. Seize the Grid. We're on Instagram. And then, of course, we do a lot of, in New Haven, we do a lot of immigration work. We work with a coalition out there, and we work for trans rights. That's a really big fight for us, because, again, it goes back to like liberation. There's no reason why, this small minority in the U.S. Should be as demonized and vilified as it is. So actually this Thursday on the New Haven Green, it's at 5:30. It'll be a protest for trans healthcare. Yale has done some things as of late when it comes to denying trans healthcare. So it's something that we are, organizing against, because again, trans people deserve dignity. They deserve to live their life out and proud, and that's something that we're fighting for. And then, of course, in New London, we do a lot of anti-war work. So this Saturday, we have got a anti-war teach-in that we'll be doing. And so there is a flyer out there. It has the PSL as well as Voluntown Peace Trust.
Is that Des Park?
Yes, that is Des Park. Yeah. And then we actually have, and that's not on this the flyer that will be presented, but Veterans for Peace actually signed on as well as a co-sponsor.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So we're very proud to be doing this event. We're going to talk about, no war with Iran. We've seen, escalating. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, escalating tensions in Iran with Israel, and this is something that we've seen manufactured wars in the early 2000s. So this is something that we really want to push back and fight against and organize around.
And I just wanted to point out also there are a couple of other things going on this week. Tomorrow, it's Hiroshima anniversary.
That's right.
And in New London, I don't have a flyer. There will be people at the courthouse in New London from 2:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon, just in remembrance of, when the United States dropped the big bomb.
Yeah.
And I think there will be some Vets for Peace, people from the Southeast Connecticut Committee for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons.
Oh, wow, okay.
Some will be there.
I believe I met some of those folks at the EB, Surviving the EB
You
Economy.
probably did.
Yeah.
And then on Thursday, there is another event in New London, also at the courthouse, 6 p.m., August 7th, a rally to defend the right to protest attacks on immigration, stopping the immigrations, stopping ICE, how to stand up to ICE. I think one thing that's happened with our current administration, and I don't know if it's a bad thing or maybe a blessing in disguise, that I think everyone is starting to feel like, oh, it could touch us, except for a couple people really in their ivory towers. But I think we can't really externalize what's happening in Palestine or what's happening here. I know in New Haven, it's a controversy with Avelo Air having a contract with ICE for deportations.
Yesterday, 5 people were kidnapped in New Britain. And there was an emergency action today in New Britain that the PSL was involved in. So, we are working class people. We see what's happening to folks in our community, and we're just people who want to stand up and fight against it. I'm not some organizer who's gone to college, who's, spent my life reading books. I grew up poor. I grew up with working class families and working in a working class community. And I found my way out of the Democratic Party. I found my way out of the capitalist two-party system. And I think that so many other people are waking up to it. And if you are interested in joining, please.
I was going to ask, if someone wants to find out more, where do they go?
Yeah, PSL CT on Instagram. You could also go to pslweb.org. And then there's a join. You can find our branch, join there. You'll probably hear from me, Nick Ortiz, as well as some other comrades. And, the big thing for us is just connecting with working class people, because again, we are working class people.
Well, thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
And it was fun. And next week, I think we're going to have Josh Steele-Kelly, whom some of your Southeast Connecticut people will know, who is one of the founders of the Yankee National Party. And we're kind of going to continue a little bit on this tear of talking about different parties, because the Democrats and the Republicans aren't really enough. So thanks for coming on, and we'll see you all next week.